Well, good morning, folks. Today I want a brief discussion about through-hull sealing Seacocks, that which keeps the water out of your boat should an internal hose or connection fail. So we'll start with a little anatomy lesson of my first choice, my preferred Seacock type and style, which is the silicon bronze tapered plug Seacock. I suppose the term Seacock has been applied to a lot of different kinds of device or valve that perform the same function, but there are a number of reasons, and I'll go through those why this is my preferred type. We'll get into some of the different materials, some of the different styles of valve that are used, and again why my preferences are for these. Again, those are only preferences. As I always say, we each sail our own ship, and you have to make your own trade-off decisions. But there are some things that I want to discuss today that are not matters of opinion. They're matters of physical fact, and failure to recognize those or understand them could put you in serious peril. So first discussion, why do I prefer bronze? Bronze has advantages and disadvantages. It has a tensile strength up around 37,000 psi, which is pretty good. We can consider that to be capable of taking a fair amount of abuse. What do I mean by abuse? Well, consider that, as you'll see in a bit, these are generally stuffed away in lockers and places where it's not inconceivable that things will shift and hit them. My allergy to the composite Marlon plastic valves is that I have personally snapped off two of them by accident. You're in a sail locker trying to do something, your foot slips, comes up hard against the hose connecting to this, and the next thing you know, it snaps off like a carrot. Marlon's tensile strength is somewhere around 10 to 12,000 psi, so it's roughly a third as strong as silicon bronze. When we talk about the Marlon valves, I'll go around from the other side and admit that there are some advantages. So the principal disadvantage to a bronze through hull is probably corrosion, galvanic corrosion. Certainly electrolysis is a consideration with bronze, although it's better than brass. I can't state strongly enough, never ever use brass as a critical fitting below the waterline. Bronze, if you look at the galvanic table here, you'll see is generally not problematic in combination with stainless steel. And since you will have other fittings below the waterline likely that are a form of stainless steel, such as, for example, a prop shaft, bronze is the correct copper tin combination material to use with those in proximity. You do need to bond these. Bonding them means essentially electrically tying them together, and preferably tying them then to a sacrificial zinc or ground plane underwater. They do have a critical liability, as I would encourage you to go over to my buddy Kevin Boothby's YouTube page of How to Sail Oceans, where you'll see what happens when a bronze Seacock equipped hull is struck by lightning. That huge discharge of power, very often finding path to water through this fitting, can very quickly and very dramatically alter the metal content and render this fitting brittle and relatively unsafe. It's not guaranteed that it's going to blow out of the hull. It's not guaranteed that it's going to crack and crumble after, but putting that much power through this as an electrical conductor will certainly render this in need of replacement, and could very well heat up the area around this to the point of damaging your fiberglass and your paint. So Lightning strike's probably one of the biggest critical downsides to bronze. However, my own personal preference, as I say, is to embrace the strength of this material and know that if a toolbox shifts in the locker, or if I'm clumsy while I'm in the locker, I'm far less likely to snap this fitting off if it's installed correctly. So other points I want to make here, probably the most critical point in this entire discussion, whether you're using bronze, Marlon, or a stainless steel composition, is that this fitting that passes through your hull, mushroom fitting you might call it, this fitting thread is a straight thread. The female thread in the bottom of a proper seacock is a straight thread. What that means is that you thread this fitting in with no increase in resistance all the way in until it bottoms out. And at some point before that bottom out, you should have compressed your hull and backing plate thickness such that this is actually clamped and squeezing together. If this were not a proper seacock, if it were instead a ball valve, which I will show a little further down the line, this thread would be NPT, National Pipe Thread. NPT threads are conical. They are tapered from root to base. And essentially, those threads seal when that taper is fully jammed into the conical female thread. This will be a controversial statement. Some of you might take issue with this, but this is what I was taught in learning pipe fitting. When you use a pipe thread and you use a Teflon tape or a Teflon paste lubricant, you are not applying a sealant to the space between these threads. You are applying a lubricant. National Pipe Thread conical threads seal by fully engaging and being threaded down to refusal. Again, all the reason in the world that you don't use a tapered thread on a through hull is you don't know if that bottom out is going to occur at what specific thickness. But in order for the thread to seal, it must go into a full thread distance. So when you see a ball valve, a plumbing ball valve, particularly a brass one, on a through hull fitting, replace it. It's incorrect. It's not proper boat building technique, and it's dangerous. And as you can imagine, were this a tapered thread and this a straight thread, you would thread it down to refusal, but it would wobble because this thread would be conical and this one would be straight. If it were the other way around, this were a straight thread and this were conical, you'd have the same problem. And you'd never get a good seal. So, very important. A through hull mushroom, a through hull fitting that goes through the skin of the boat is a straight thread. The only exception to that is when I'm working on a metal hull and a section of pipe has been welded into the hull, and the top of that section of pipe is a tapered thread because it's pipe thread. That's outside of our discussion. What we're looking at here is what you would typically find on a pleasure boat. So, what's in a name? Tapered plug. Note that this diameter is smaller than this diameter. It only fits in the body one way. Won't go in that way. Which means that this diameter is larger than this diameter. The way this works is that this plug slides into the body, and when it's rotated, generally so that this key is vertical or in line with the path of the water flow, it's open. When it's rotated 90 degrees, it's closed. Pretty simple. This particular Seacock isn't made anymore. This was a company called Wilcox Crittenden. But all of these Seacocks will have a way on the small end. What you see here is a flat that's machined into the bronze. The purpose of that is that this thrust washer has an equal flat that needs to seat there. So when you're putting this together, you cannot just put it together willy-nilly in any rotation. There is only one position that the thrust washer seats in. And when you get it, it has minimal rotation. The reason for that is that when you rotate this barrel, you want that washer to rotate with the barrel. What that will do is ensure that the nut that's holding this all together spins with the barrel. If you don't do that, then you'll constantly be tightening and loosening the nut, and that's just not a good situation. So one of the reasons that bronze Seacocks are in disfavor lately is they do require maintenance. One of the reasons that I like them is that they allow maintenance. So every 2 years when I'm dry docked for bottom painting, each of the 3 Seacocks on Charis is disassembled, just as you see it here. It's greased around the perimeter of the barrel, and then it's reassembled. Lately my preference is this silicone superlube grease, but as I say, everyone will have their own favorite. Any grease will work. There's really no wrong answer on there. The heavier the grease, generally, the easier this job is. When I say easier, what I'm really referring to is the fact that there is somewhat of an art to reassembling a Seacock, a tapered plug Seacock. The reason there's an art to it is if you reassemble this and immediately tighten this down so much that you cannot spin this plug relatively easily without a large tool, then what you'll have done is you'll have squeezed all the grease out. So this takes a little practice. What you've got to do is tighten that to just the right point so that this thing spins by hand but doesn't spin freely with vibration. So trust me, the first few times you do this, you'll probably end up taking it out and re-greasing it a couple of times because you'll over-tighten it, and then you'll realize that you've just squeezed all the grease out, and you don't want to leave it underwater for 2 years with no grease. So reassembly process, you grease it, thread it back together. In that process, though, what you're really doing more than anything is you're pulling it apart and you're observing this barrel. You can see that this has been left in the closed position for quite a while just based on this darker ring, but there's no corrosion here. In fact, you could lightly clean this up with some emery cloth if you felt like it was starting to get grooved. What you will see as these age is sort of a pink color, a pitting of the surface. As long as that is in the center of the valve, it's not a problem. When you start to get corrosion around the 2 edges outside of the opening, then you're getting into a situation where this valve may start to drip. That is actually what happened to the head discharge, which was this identical valve actually, before the head on Charis was replaced with the airhead. So reassembly, as I say, grease it, slide it back in, align your thrust washer to the right position. Your primary nut that goes against the thrust washer generally has a flange on it like you see here. You want to thread that down so that this barrel can no longer move in and out, but not so tightly that you squeeze the grease out. This should actually be quite stiff, by the way. You may need to put a wrench on this to turn it. This is not a thread that you want loosening up easily, so don't feel like you've got to lubricate this until you can spin it on by hand. This, by the way, is quite an acrobatic feat in a locker or a tight space next to an engine. So again, one of the reasons these have fallen out of favor is that you do need to do this. If you don't service these valves every 2 years, they will probably stick and fail to close when you want them to. So there's a convenience factor in the plastic valves that are available. There's a convenience factor in the bronze ball valves that are available. So you might say, well, you've got these two fittings on the sides. Why don't you just put a grease Zerk fitting on those? You can do that, but what you have to understand in doing that is that these are not designed to be grease fitting points. These are drains. Again, think about this valve in the closed position. You've now winterized your boat. Shut this down so that you can't have a frozen hose sink the boat. The purpose of these two plugs is that you then remove them and drain the water out of the body of this valve, because if this remains full of seawater and it freezes, even 37,000 psi bronze will crack. So if you're winterizing your boat and you have these two plugs, you pull these out, you drain that water out. You'll see when I show the Groco products that are out there, one of the compromises that they show for their ball valves, which are not so easily disassembled, but for winterization they will show one of these remaining as a plug and one as a Zerk fitting. So it's sort of a halfway in between, and it's one way of doing this. My recommendation though is don't take the shortcut. Putting a Zerk fitting on these might seem like a tempting way to avoid disassembling this every couple of years, but it's not a good solution. You won't be able to observe whether your barrel is turning pink and getting pitted with corrosion. You essentially are just putting a blindfold on. It's not a good alternative to valve disassembly. You're able to do what you choose on your pleasure boat here in the U.S. On the commercial boats that I work on, there's a 2-year schedule at which the Coast Guard would require this valve to actually be disassembled and inspected internally for any signs of corrosion. So the options on a commercial project are to either use a valve like this that has the ability to be disassembled, and there are many other types, by the way, for larger vessels, or to accept the fact that this is a disposable item and you're going to simply take the valve off, throw it away, and put a new one on every 2 years. Now, as I put this back together, again, you've got to be careful not to over tighten. If you do over tighten, you've just removed all your hard work, squeezed out the grease. But the lock nut goes on until it backs up against the primary nut, and after that you should still be able to turn this even though it's stiff by hand. A couple of other things that I'll point out more as I show these on Charis. This flange has locations for 2 fasteners. The installation, as you'll see in the diagrams from Groco, have your skin, your hull skin, a backing block, and then fasteners. You can do those fasteners as through bolts all the way through all 3 parts, skin, backing block, and through hull, or you can do them, if the backing block is thick enough, as a blind fastener into the block. Either of those is acceptable depending on the material and the thicknesses that you're dealing with. On Charis, I have opted to through bolt all the way from the outside. The reason for this flange, and the reason that, if you look at this, you've got this stem. You don't want that stem to be the thing that is absorbing the load as you torque on this to open and close it. What you want is for there to be something else providing a wider base of support so that that load is taken by these fasteners in this widespread flange instead of by these threads in this stem. So finally, the last point that I will make about why I prefer this style over the ball valve or any other type other than the tapered plug is a really simple thing. This robust cast barrel with a very thick key that you can put a large wrench on to open and close is going to give you a much greater chance of closing this valve if debris becomes stuck inside of your intake. So let's say you've got a stick that gets jammed up in there. If this were a plastic bodied valve with a plastic handle, it wouldn't take much of a stick to stop that rotation or to break the handle or the stem. If this were a ball valve type with a sheet metal handle operating a very small diameter ball stem, again, the chances of you being able to use this as a shear to literally shear off a small stick that got jammed in there would be nil. This type of valve has the greatest chance of being able to actually shear an obstruction and continue to be closed. And then finally, with the tapered plug, remember, small end, large end. Let's say that you are on a boat that hasn't been maintained as it should have been with lubrication and service of these valves. The thing that a tapered plug will allow you to do that no other style of Seacock can do is it'll allow you to take a blunt instrument, don't use a wrench, use a 2x4, and apply trauma therapy to the small end. What have you just done? Well, what you've done is you've jarred that tapered plug from small end to large end, and chances are pretty good that you've freed it up to be able to rotate in spite of the corrosion. So it gives you a second chance at being able to close this valve if for whatever reason the internal drum has corroded to the body. That in itself to me is a feature that reassures me when I get on a boat that I don't know that has this style of valve, because essentially I know that I can very quickly make that valve close if I have to. So that's the top choice in my world of how to shut the water off if you have a failure on an intake fitting on your boat. Now, so here we're looking at Charis's galley sink discharge Seacock, and this is an identical Wilcox Crittenden bronze tapered plug Seacock to the one in my office. A few things of note. You'll see just inboard of the Seacock is the softwood pine tapered plug, emergency plug should it be needed for failure of the Seacock. On the hull you'll see a doubler. This is a resin coated piece of plywood, square of plywood, basically doubling the thickness of the hull where the Seacock penetrates and reinforcing that hole. As well, this Seacock is installed with through bolts that come all the way through from the outside around the outer flange. You can just see the aft one in the frame here. Another thing of note, this is wire reinforced seawater hose. It used to be green line, blue line, different stripes. This happens to be Vetus, which was the right diameter that I needed. In any case, what you want is a good rubber marine hose, reinforced, multi-layered, and preferably wire reinforced if you can get it. And then one final feature that you really can't see, it's buried up here just below the sink inside of the hose. The reason you see 4 hose clamps there is that inside of that upper section of this hose just below the sink is a bronze ball check valve. And that's a handy thing, not only on Charis, because if I pan out a bit here to the galley, the height of this sink is above the water line, but not by a lot. And when the boat heels or when you start bouncing up and down in a seaway, you could get water splashing back in there. That's one convenience feature. The other thing I will say about any discharge hose or through hull is that if the hose in the fitting is intended only for water to travel out of the boat, then having an automatic check valve, either a ball check or a swing check, while it will reduce the flow through that hose, so in other words, it may not be an acceptable trade-off in an exhaust line or a cockpit scupper where the critical feature is maximum flow rate. In the case of a galley sink where it's a convenience item, having that ball check in there means that even should the tail fitting on the bottom of the sink fail or break and that hose fall over to a position below the water line, that ball check will provide one more layer of protection until I can get in here and close the actual manual seacock. One thing you'll see on this type of seacock is that it does not have a handle built in. A lot of the Wilcox-Crittenden seacocks came that way, and in general, if it weren't for the fact that just over my left shoulder right here is the drawer in which I keep the wrenches and tools that I would need to put my hand on to close that, I would then strap a wrench to that valve. In this case, I don't feel the need to do it. Likewise with your pine plugs, I have over the years taken to tying one to each fitting, but in addition to those that are tied on, there's another whole set right here at hand's reach. I'm using side yarn about this ball check at the top of the galley discharge hose. I was here in my winter slip one year, and the summer renter of the slip got an early launch date and insisted that I get out ahead of the normal contract time. And you know, being that I am very blessed to have a affordable, favorable rate for winter dockage here, I didn't argue. I just got Charis ready early and went off grid a little earlier than planned. To my surprise, as I came in a couple of days after I went out to the mooring, there was nothing sticking up in my slip here except a mast. It turned out that the owner of that boat, who, let's just say that given his profession should have known better, had decided to uninstall his galley sink, did not have a check valve at the top of his discharge hose like this, and did not close the through hull seacock, either because it wouldn't close or he forgot to. Anyway, my only comment after that was to my buddy that runs the marina, if I had known he was just going to use the basement, I might have stayed on the first floor a little longer. And back here is my engine seawater intake. This is a Spartan bronze tapered plug seacock, very much like the one that you see in my office. Groco is no longer making these, or Wilcox-Crittenden I should say. So currently the only source I know for a true tapered plug seacock, sorry about the photography angles here, is not very good, but anyway, Spartan is the only company I know that's still making these. So when I put this engine in 2014, I went to them, and again, you can see the doubler plate on the hull. You can see the fasteners fastening that flange down into the doubler plate to stabilize the valve, so that when you're pushing against that handle, you're not transferring all of that torque and load into the stem of the seacock that comes up through the hull. That force is being spread out into that flanged base. The Spartan valves, I would note, do come with a handle built into them, but they do have that same wide, substantial cast key in the end of the barrel of the Seacock, and that's critical in my opinion about these fittings. Well, I see I'm getting a little long-winded in this video, maybe making up for last week's brief snack, but anyway, I'll just breeze quickly through my lesser choices of through-hull type. I guess my second choice would be these Groco. There's a bunch of different series of these. The Groco Sieg valves are ball valves, just to be clear. So they do have the disadvantage to me of a sheet metal handle, a relatively small ball stem, relatively large diameter ball that's actuated by that stem. And while they can be disassembled and taken apart, quite honestly, I don't think anyone ever does. Typically, these are, if they need to be proven to be in good condition, they're just replaced. So, but the Groco valves are made to be C valves. They are flanged. They are made out of good marine materials. You can get them in bronze or different stainless steel grades. So Groco is a good option if you want the ball valve type or you cannot get a tapered plug for whatever reason. Groco's, particularly the FBV series here, would be choice number 2. Based on my priorities, choice number 3, which is probably choice number 1 for most folks these days, would be these force bar Marlon valves. This is a carbon fiber infused plastic valve. As I mentioned, the physical properties to resist damage are much lower, about a third of those of bronze, but there's absolutely zero concern over corrosion, galvanic corrosion or otherwise. These are somewhere in between the ball valve and the tapered plug in the way they're actuated. The handle is quite robust, and the stem that comes from the internal rotating drum out to the handle is quite a bit larger than on a standard metallic ball valve. But then it has to be because, again, the material strength is a third. So not sure that I would choose one of these if my major concern was being able to rotate it if something got stuck in there. But certainly if you want low maintenance and material properties that are close to those of your fiberglass skin. Fiberglass I would typically call somewhere around 17,000 psi versus 10 to 12 here. These are a good choice for a lot of reasons, just not my choice. And then finally, and I won't even call this a choice, this is a just never ever do this. The last thing that I want to see on a hull closure is a plumbing store ball valve. It doesn't belong there. It's going to get you in trouble, or it's certainly not going to get you out of trouble when you need it to. So pipe thread, brass ball valve, doesn't belong there. Even a plastic one, PVC, which wouldn't have the corrosion issues, it's just not the proper use for that piece of hardware. This is like a life raft. If something goes sideways and you need it, you don't want to have cut corners. You want to know that you've done it right and you've got the best one you could possibly have put in that situation to get you out of trouble. So that's my take. Thanks for coming aboard this week. I've been a little longer-winded, as I say, than usual, but maybe this will do someone some good, and look forward to getting together with you again next week. If you enjoyed it, please like and share and subscribe. I'd love to get the view hours up and just get the message that the message is getting through. We'll see you next week.